The incision was already open when the alarm changed pitch. Sana Okonkwo lay on the calibration cradle with her left forearm flayed to the muscle, and she watched the wound the way a person watches a kettle. The ScienceFiction did precise work. They had opened her along a marked line, 12 centimeters down to the fascia, and they had done it without anesthetic because the whole point of a calibration subject was to feel the thing being measured. She had signed for that. Hazard pay bought a lot of tolerance. The pitch changed because the wound had started to close, and it was closing wrong. "Hold the field," said Restorer Prime Ashen. His voice came out of the translation collar as something flat and cool, but the fluid under his skin had gone bright. That was the tell with ScienceFiction. Their bodies were amber glass and slow cartilage, translucent enough that you could read their blood like a gauge, and Ashen's had lit from the wrists up. "Attendant, read me the margin." "Margin is negative," said the younger one, Kelu. She stood at the instrument arm with 2 of her 4 hands on the display and the other 2 pressed flat to the cradle rail, which was a thing Sana had noticed they did when frightened, the way a nervous man grips a doorframe. "It's negative, Restorer. The tissue is ahead of the schedule." "By how much?" "By all of it." Sana turned her head to look. Under the sterile lamps the cut in her arm was knitting, and it was not knitting the way skin knit. Skin took days. This took the length of a held breath. The fascia had already sealed. The muscle was drawing its severed ends together like 2 hands finding each other in the dark, and where they met the tissue did not scar, did not pucker, did not leave the pale seam that every honest wound left behind. It laid itself down new, clean, better than it had been before they cut it. She had been dosed 9 minutes ago. That was the schedule. 9 minutes for the conquered restorative to reach the wound site, and then a slow, governed regrowth over 4 hours that the physicians would chart against their models, and then the quench, which stopped the process cold so the tissue would not overshoot. 4 hours. That was the number in the contract. The number on the cradle display now read the elapsed regrowth at 91%, and the clock beside it said she was 11 minutes in. "Quench it," Ashen said. "We are not at the window." "We are past the window. Quench it now." Kelu moved. The quench came off a separate line, a colorless agent the ScienceFiction called stillance, and it went into the port at Sana's elbow with a small cold weight she felt travel up the vein. Stillance did what its name promised. It told the restorative to stop, told the tissue to hold its current state, froze the whole cascade in place, so the physicians could measure a finished result instead of a moving one. Sana had felt it 4 times in the past 2 weeks. Each time it had arrived like a hand laid on the back of the neck, and the healing had stilled. This time she felt it arrive. She felt the cold travel up. She felt it reach the wound. And she felt the wound ignore it. "Restorer," Kelu said very quietly. The muscle finished closing. The dermis flowed shut over it. The last of the incision sealed under the lamps and left nothing, not a line, not a shine, only the faint tracks of the dried antiseptic they had painted on before opening her. Sana flexed the hand. The fingers answered. There was no stiffness in the new tissue, no tightness, no report of damage. Her arm felt like an arm that had never been cut. It felt, if anything, slightly better than the arm on the other side. "The stillance failed," Ashen said. He was looking at the elbow port as though it had insulted him. "Attendant, confirm the dose." "Confirm the line." "The line is clean, the dose was full, it reached the site." Kelu's 2 free hands had not left the rail. "Restorer, it reached the site and the tissue completed anyway. The stillance is in her. It's in the tissue. The tissue simply," she stopped because there was no procedural word for it, and the ScienceFiction lived and died by procedural words. "It went around it." Sana sat up on one elbow. The straps had been loose all morning. They never bothered tightening them for a subject who had come this far in the program without incident, and she had never given them a reason. She looked down at her healed arm, and then she looked at the 2 aliens, the old one bright with alarm and the young one holding the rail, and she said the first thing she had said all session. "You want to do it again." It was not a question. She had been in the program long enough to know how it went. An anomaly was not a stopping point for the conquered. An anomaly was a thing to be reproduced, controlled, and filed, and until it had been reproduced and controlled, it would not be allowed to simply exist in the room with them. Ashen's fluid had not dimmed. He wanted to do it again. He would tell himself it was for the integrity of the data. Sana understood integrity of the data. It was, more or less, the reason she was paid. "Lie back," Ashen said. She lay back. The station was called Halcyon Reach, and it hung in a wide, slow orbit over a blue-white world the Sire had never named in her hearing, and the Concord of restorative medicine kept 9 wards aboard it. Sana had only ever seen the 9th. She had been recruited on a mining tug out past the belt line, 22 years old and good with her hands, and out of options after the Delvin Company folded and left 300 contract crew stranded on a station with no fuel and no wages, and the Concord's recruiter had come through the transit hub like a person walking through an orchard. They wanted human subjects. Human tissue tolerated the restorative in ways Sire tissue did not. Human bodies were robust, forgiving, cheap to feed, and the recruiter had not said this part, but Sana had worked it out, expendable in a way that mattered when you were calibrating a compound you intended to one day trust inside your own fragile people. Because the Sire were fragile. That was the thing you learned first about them and never stopped learning. A Sire who broke an arm did not heal in 6 weeks. A Sire healed in a year if the break was clean, if it was set perfectly, if nothing went wrong, and things went wrong. Their bones were glass and cartilage. Their skin tore like wet paper. They had built the greatest medical civilization in the reachable dark not out of ambition, but out of terror, because a species that could be killed by a fall down a short flight of stairs had to become very, very good at putting itself back together, or it did not stay a species for long. Every surgical technique Sana had ever heard named had a Sire name under it. They had spent 900 years chasing one thing above all others, a way to make a body regrow what it had lost. The restorative was the closest they had come. It was gentle. It was slow. It was governed. It was, above all, controllable because a compound you could not switch off was not medicine. It was a wound of a different kind. They had been testing it on humans for 2 years. Sana was in her 6th week. She knew the other subjects by their first names and nothing else, because the Concord kept them separated between sessions, and the wards did not encourage talk. There was a big quiet man named Boyd who had been an ice hauler. There was a woman named Priya who never said what she had done before, and a kid, younger than Sana, who went by Tam and had lied about his age to sign the contract, and everyone knew it and no one said it. 4 humans in the 9th ward. 4 robust, forgiving, cheap-to-feed bodies, healing on schedule, 4 hours at a stretch, so that one day a Sire child with a shattered wrist might be made whole in a year instead of never. Sana did not hate the work. She had done worse work for worse reasons. The Sire were not cruel, they were careful, which was a different and colder thing, and carefulness she could respect. They opened her along marked lines and they closed her on schedule, and they paid her in transit credit she was banking toward passage somewhere with a sky. It was a trade. She had made worse trades. She had never, in 6 weeks, seen a wound refuse the stillance. They did it again an hour later, after Ashen had pulled the morning's data 3 times and found nothing wrong with it and been unable to leave it alone. This time they cut deeper. A marked line down the outside of the same forearm, and under it with a tool she did not watch, they nicked the bone. Not a break. A scored groove in the radius, the kind of controlled insult they used when they wanted to measure regrowth in something slower than muscle, because bone was where the restorative earned its keep and bone was where it was hardest to make behave. They dosed her. They set the 4-hour clock out of habit, though no one in the room believed in the 4-hour clock anymore. The muscle closed in under 2 minutes, the way it had before. The bone took 6. Sana felt it, which she had not expected. Muscle knitting was a warmth and a pull. Bone knitting was a deep, hard ache that had a shape to it, a sense of the groove filling and the fill being packed down and tested and packed again, as if something inside her were doing careful masonry and would not be hurried and would not be stopped. When it finished, the ache did not fade into soreness. It faded into nothing. She flexed the arm. The bone under the new muscle was sound. It felt again like it had never been touched. "Stillance," Ashen said, at the 2-minute mark, the moment the muscle had closed, and Kelu had already had it in the line, and it had already failed, and Sana had watched the old alien watch it fail with the specific stillness of a man realizing that the thing he is looking at is not going to start making sense. He called in a second physician after that, then a third. Their names went past Sana in the translation caller's flat voice. A broad one called Vess, who ran the ward's instrument bank, and a thin, nervous one called Alan, whose specialty, as far as she could tell, was disbelief. They stood around the cradle in their pale, sterile wrappings, with the fluid moving bright under their skin, and they argued in the clicking, under speech the caller didn't bother translating, and periodically one of them would remember she was there, a person, awake, lying on the table with her arm laid open and healed and laid open again, and would ask her a question in the flat collar voice. Did she feel pain? Yes, normal pain until the healing took it. Did she feel unwell? No. Had she taken any compound not on the ward's manifest? No. Did she understand that what her body was doing was not possible? Sana looked at the thin, nervous one, Alan, who had asked it, and she took a moment before she answered, because it was the first interesting question anyone had asked her in 6 weeks. "It's happening," she said, "so it's possible, you just don't have a word for it yet." The fluid under Alan's skin did a thing she hadn't seen before. It pulled back from the surface, retreated toward the core of him, the way blood leaves a face. On a human it would have been going pale. On a Scythe, she would learn later, it meant something closer to a man taking a step back from the edge of a roof. "We have a great many words," Alan said. "Not for this." "No," he admitted, and that was the first honest thing a Scythe had said to her in the 9th Ward, and she filed it, because she was starting to understand that she was going to need to keep her own data now, and that no one in the room was going to keep it for her. By the end of the first day, they had stopped pretending the 4-hour clock meant anything, and they had started running the numbers that actually frightened them. Sana understood the shape of it from the way the room moved even when she couldn't follow the underspeech. The restorative had a governor built into it. That was the whole genius of the compound, the thing 900 years of Scythe medicine had been reaching for, not the regrowth, which was almost the easy part, but the leash on the regrowth. A body told to rebuild itself would, left alone, rebuild past the point of use. Tissue would pile on tissue. A healed wound would keep healing, keep thickening, keep dividing, until the healing itself became the wound, and the Scythe had a long, grim history with that failure and a specific horror of it. So the restorative did not simply tell the body to grow. It told the body to grow to a target and then stop. The stillance was a backup for when the governor slipped. Belt and suspenders. 2 ways to say stop to a process that, uncontrolled, did not know the word. Sana's body had heard the word. It had healed her arm to exactly the right shape, no more, and stopped on its own, clean, at the correct target. That was not the problem. The problem was that it had stopped when it decided to, not when they told it to. The governor had said stop and the tissue had already stopped, on its own terms, having reached its own idea of finished. The stillance had said stop and the tissue had said, in effect, that it already knew. Both of the Concord's leashes had closed on a body that was no longer wearing a collar. They had a compound that could make a body rebuild anything. And on this body, on this one human body on the cradle in the 9th Ward, they had lost the part where they got to decide when it stopped. Vess, the broad one at the instrument bank, said something in underspeech that made the fluid drop in all 4 of them at once. Kelu translated it later, when the others had gone, and she was closing the cradle down for the night and thought Sana was asleep. She said it in the flat collar voice, quietly to no one. He said we gave a match to a creature made of tinder and told it to hold the flame steady. Sana wasn't asleep. She lay still on the cradle in the low ward light with her two sound arms folded on her chest, and she listened to the young alien pack the instruments away with two hands while the other two gripped the rail. And she did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would make the young one feel better, and Sana had never been in the habit of lying to make anyone feel better. But she filed it, tinder and flame, it was a good line. It was also wrong, and she knew it was wrong the way she knew her own hands, and it would take the sire 4 more days and a great deal of fear to learn what she already suspected lying there in the dark. She was not tinder, tinder only burns. Her body was learning. On the second day, they brought in the stronger stillants. Sana knew it was stronger before anyone told her, because they moved differently around it. The colorless agent came out of a sealed case that Vess carried in both of her broad hands, and the 2 nervous physicians stood well back from it, and Kelu, who did the actual dosing, wore a second layer of sterile wrap over her arms. The Conquered had a graduated series of the quench. The one they had used the day before was the clinical dose, the one they would eventually use inside a sire patient, gentle enough to be safe in a fragile body. This was not that one. This was the one they used in the tissue banks, on cultures that had slipped their governor and started to pile, the dose you gave a thing that was growing when it should not grow and would not listen. It was strong enough that they could not have safely put it in one of their own. It was, Kelu explained in the flat collar voice, not intended for a living body at all. Then why put it in mine? Sana said. Because your body will survive it, Kelu said, and did not seem to enjoy saying it. The restorer believes it will survive it. And if the restorer's wrong? Kelu's free hands found the rail. Then I will have made an error I cannot take back, she said, and I will carry it for the rest of my life, which is longer than yours, and I am telling you this so that you understand I am not doing it lightly. Sana looked at the young alien for a moment. It was, she thought, the closest thing to an apology she was going to get in the 9th Ward, and it was more than she'd expected, and she gave the only thing back that she had to give. Do the cut first, she said. Then dose me. Then quench it while it's still moving. That's what you actually want to measure, whether the strong dose can catch it in the act. Waiting until after it heals just tells you it healed. You already know it heals. The fluid moved under Kelu's skin, and Sana had spent enough weeks reading them now to know what that particular movement meant. It meant the human on the table had just designed a cleaner version of the experiment than the physician had, and the physician knew it. Yes, Kelu said, that is what we want to measure. So they cut her, a fresh line down the same forearm because they had marked it and there was no sense wasting a fresh site, and they dosed her, and Kelu stood over the elbow port with the strong stillants in the line and her 4 hands very steady, and she watched the wound. And at the moment the muscle began to draw its severed ends together, she pushed the dose. The cold that came up Sana's arm this time was not a hand on the neck. It was a fist. It was cold enough to be its own kind of pain, a burning cold that climbed the vein and spread into the wound site and hit the healing tissue like a bucket of ice thrown on a fire. And for 1 full second, Sana counted it, because she had started counting everything. The healing stopped. The room went utterly still, for Sire fluid bright, watching a wound hold. Then the healing started again. It did not start where it had left off. That was the thing Sana would spend the rest of the day trying to make them understand, and the thing that finally cracked the last of Ashen's composure. The tissue did not simply resume, did not just shrug off the cold and carry on. It changed its approach. Where the strong stillants had pooled in the wound, the new tissue grew around it, walled it off, laid down a lattice that the cold could not reach into, and then built through the lattice from the inside, so that the very presence of the quench in the wound became a thing the healing had accounted for and rooted past. The dose that was strong enough to kill a culture, strong enough that they could not have risked it in one of their own, sat in Sana's arm doing nothing, sealed inside a little cyst of tissue her body had grown specifically to contain it, while the wound closed clean above it. 6 minutes, sound arm, no scar. It adapted to the dose, Alan said. His collar voice had gone thin. The tissue met the strong stillance and it adapted to it, in one exposure. It has never seen this compound before, and it adapted to it in one exposure. Bodies do not adapt in one exposure, Vess said. Immunity takes generations, takes lineages. A body meets a poison, the body that survives it breeds a body that resists it, and that takes. I know what it takes, Alan said. It takes an age, it takes death and inheritance. It does not take 6 minutes in a single arm. I know what it takes. Alan was looking at Sana now, only at Sana, and the fluid had pulled so far back from the surface of him that his skin had gone the flat gray of a thing gone cold. And yet, Sana flexed the hand, the fingers answered. Somewhere inside the forearm, sealed in a pocket of new tissue, sat a dose of poison her body had decided not to argue with and simply built a room around. She thought about the young alien's line from the night before, the match and the tinder, and she thought that Vess had been closer than she knew and still wrong. Tinder did not build a room around the flame. Tinder did not learn the shape of the thing trying to kill it and grow past it on the first try. You keep using the word adapt, Sana said, like it's a surprise. The four of them looked at her. Where I'm from, she said, we call that Tuesday. She did not say it to be clever. Sana was not, by temperament, a person who said things to be clever. The audience for cleverness had left her life around the time the Delvin Company folded, and she had not gone looking for a new one. She said it because it was true, and because she had begun to suspect that these people, these brilliant, fragile people who had spent 900 years learning to knit their own paper skin back together, did not understand the first thing about what they had signed onto when they hired robust, forgiving, cheap-to-feed human bodies to test their gentle-governed compound on. They thought they had hired durable meat. They had hired something that had spent 4 billion years on a world that tried to kill it every single day, and had answered by learning faster than the world could invent new ways to try. That was the part they didn't have a word for, not the healing. The Science could do healing. They were better at the theory of healing than any species Sana had ever heard of. What they could not do, what their fragile glass bodies had never once in 900 years needed to do, was improvise under a lethal load. Learn a poison in an afternoon. Meet a thing designed to stop them and treat it not as a wall but as a lesson. Sana's ancestors had done that in tide pools. It was not a talent. It was the oldest thing she was. She kept her own count now in her head because she did not trust the ward to keep it for her, and because keeping count was a thing she could do while lying still on a cradle with her arm open. Day 1, the wound refused the clinical stillance. Day 2, morning, the wound refused the strong stillance and built a room around it. Day 2, afternoon, they escalated again, because escalating was the only thing the conquered knew how to do with a result it could not file, and because Ashen had by now stopped sleeping, and it showed in the ragged bright of the fluid at his throat. They stopped trying to quench the healing. They started trying to outrun it. The instrument they brought in on the second afternoon was not a stillance at all. It was a field emitter, a squat gray device vest mounted over the cradle on a jointed arm, and its purpose, Kelu explained, was to arrest cellular division directly. The stillance worked chemically, through the blood, which meant it had to reach the tissue and be recognized by the tissue, which was the gap the healing kept slipping through. The field did not ask the tissue's permission. It reached into the wound site, and it stopped the cells from dividing at all, physically, at the level of the machinery inside them, the way you might jam a gear rather than argue with the engine. Nothing grew in the field. Nothing could. It was the tool the conquered used when they needed a wound to hold absolutely still for a delicate reconstruction, and it did not fail, because there was nothing in it for a body to adapt to. You could not learn your way around a jammed gear. The gear was simply jammed. They cut her, they dosed her, they switched on the field. The wound held. Truly held this time, not the 1-second flinch of the strong stillance, but a real and total arrest, the severed muscle lying open and still in the gray shimmer of the field, not healing, not able to heal, the machinery of it locked. Sana lay and looked at her own open arm not closing and felt, for the first time in the ward, something she would have to call interest, not fear. She had checked for fear and it wasn't there. Interest. She wanted to know what her body would do about the gear. Margin holding, Kelu said. The site is arrested. Restorer, the site is fully arrested. How long? Ashen said. As long as the field runs. Then we run it, Ashen said, until I understand what I am looking at. And they ran it, and Sana lay on the cradle with her arm open in the gray light for an hour while the sire breathed, and the fluid slowly, began to settle back toward the surface of them. Because a wound that held was a wound they understood, and understanding was the thing they had been starving for since the previous morning. Then, at the far edge of the site, below the arrested muscle, something moved. Kelu saw it first because Kelu had not stopped watching the display for a moment. Restorer, her voice had gone flat and careful, there's growth at the margin. The field is running. The field is running and there is growth at the margin, below the arrest, outside the emitter's reach. They zoomed the display. Sana couldn't see it, but she felt it, the deep, careful masonry starting up again, and she understood before the sire did what her body had done, because she had been lying there for an hour with nothing to do but keep her count and think about the gear. Her body had not tried to grow through the field. It had learned the field's edges. It had felt where the arrest reached and where it did not, mapped the boundary of the thing jamming its gears, and it had simply begun rebuilding below the boundary, out past the emitter's reach, growing new tissue in the clear, and then extending it up and inward, under the arrested zone, so that the wound would close from beneath while the field held the surface obediently still. The field had not been beaten. The field had been rendered irrelevant. Her body had accepted that this one small region would not cooperate, and had rooted the entire reconstruction around it, the way water finds the low ground, the way a road goes around a mountain it cannot be bothered to move. Widen the field, Alan said. There was something climbing in his collar voice now under the flatness. Widen the emitter, cover the margin. They widened it. The growth moved to the new margin. They widened it again, and Vess said the emitter was at its limit, that a field that size would begin to arrest tissue they needed, would reach into the healthy arm, into the vessels, into things that had to keep dividing or the subject died, and Alan said widen it anyway, and Ashen said no. Ashen said no, and the ward went quiet, and the Restorer Prime stood at the foot of the cradle with his fragile glass body, and his exhausted bright fluid, and looked at the human, whose arm would not stop finding ways to heal. And he said the thing that Sana had been waiting 2 days for one of them to be brave enough to say out loud. It is not fighting the field, Ashen said. It is learning it. Every measure we bring it treats as terrain. The clinical dose it ignored. The strong dose it contained. The arrest field it went beneath. We are not slowing this. We are teaching it. Every time we tell this body no, it learns exactly what our no is made of, and it never needs to learn it twice. No one contradicted him. There was nothing to contradict. Shut off the field, Ashen said. They shut it off. Below the surface, the road that had gone around the mountain met the arrested muscle now freed, and the whole reconstruction finished in a rush, and Sana's arm closed clean, and she flexed the hand, and the fingers answered. 6 weeks, Ashen said, to no one, to the ward, to the blue-white planet turning outside the dome. We have run this compound in human subjects for 6 weeks and seen nothing but excellent, durable, forgiving results, exactly as the models predicted, and I stood in this room and I called them robust. The fluid moved in his throat. I did not understand that I was watching them be polite. Sana sat up on the cradle. No one told her to lie back this time. You dosed the others, she said. It was the first thing she had thought about that wasn't her own arm. Boyd, Priya, the kid. Same compound, same weeks, if it's the compound. It is not only the compound, Ashin said, and the way he said it stopped her. We dosed 40 human subjects across 2 years before you 4. Durable results, all of them. Excellent, unremarkable, filed. He turned the flat translated voice on her, and for the first time she heard something under it that the collar could not quite scrub out, something old and tired and afraid. The compound is the same. The bodies are the same. The variable subject is the injury. We never cut the others this deep. We never scored the bone. We never gave a human body a wound serious enough that the healing had to work, had to reach, had to try. We gave them scratches, and we measured how prettily they closed, and we told ourselves we understood the animal. He looked at her healed arm. You are the first one we hurt badly enough to teach. The ward was silent. Outside the dome the planet turned, blue and white and bright, throwing its light up under the physician's pale wrappings. And Sana Okonkwo sat on the cradle in the middle of the greatest medical civilization in the reachable dark and understood, before any of them said it, that they were not going to be able to stop what they had started, because the only tool they had was to hurt her, and hurting her was the one thing that made her stronger. They gave her the night in a recovery cell, which was new. The other subjects went back to the shared quarters between sessions, but Sana was moved alone into a small bright room with a bed and a water line and a door that, she noticed, locked from the outside now. She lay on the bed and kept her count, and listened to her own body, the way you listen to a ship you've worked long enough to know by its sounds. Something was different, and it was not only her arm. She had noticed it first in the ward and dismissed it, and now in the quiet she let herself look at it. The recovery cell was lit by a single panel in the ceiling, dim, meant for rest. She could read the fine print on the waterline valve from across the room. She could hear the coolant moving in the walls, the specific tick of the station's heat exchange, the soft 4-count breathing of the guard posted outside the door, a sieve, she thought, from the lightness of it. When she closed her eyes she could feel her own heartbeat and count it, and it was slow, slower than it should have been, 38, and even the heart of a body that had decided it had all the time in the world. She flexed her healed arm in the dark, and the tissue was not just sound. It was better. The grip in that hand had more in it than the other. The skin over the new muscle was tougher, finer, harder to mark. Her body had not just healed the wounds, it had taken notes. She understood it then, lying in the locked bright cell, more completely than the sieve would understand it for another 2 days, and she understood it without fear, because fear was a thing that happened to people who did not know what was coming, and Sana had a very good idea now of what was coming. The restorative had not given her a talent for healing. Healing she'd always had, every human had. It was slow and imperfect and it left scars, but it was there, 4 billion years old, patient. What the compound had done was take the leash off. It had walked into a system that already knew how to rebuild and adapt and survive. A system that had only ever been throttled down to a crawl by the cautious arithmetic of a body that had to make its calories last, and it had told that system, no limit. Rebuild to the target. And the human body had heard no limit, and had done the thing human bodies did with no limit, the thing that had carried her kind out of the tide pools and across a killing world and off it entirely into the dark. It had started to get better at the problem. Every wound was a problem. Every countermeasure was a problem. The strong stillance was a problem she had solved once and would never have to solve again. The arrest field was a problem she had solved once and would never have to solve again. Somewhere in her, in the sealed pockets and the reinforced tissue and the slow, strong heart, a body was building a library, and it was a library that only grew, and it had a great deal of room because it was human, and the whole history of humans was the history of running out of room and making more. She slept. She had learned a long time ago to sleep when the work paused, and the work had paused, and she slept without dreaming and woke with her count intact and her senses sharper than the night before. They cut deeper on the third day, and this time it was Alan who couldn't watch. It was a nerve. They had gone as far as they could go with muscle and bone, and the models were screaming, and someone above the ward had made a decision, because a fourth figure was in the room when Kelu came for her. A sire in wrappings a different color than the physician's, dark and unmarked, standing at the back with its 4 hands folded and its fluid held so still and so deep that Sana could not read it at all. She learned the title before the name, Conquered Adjunct. The word Kelu used for it in the collar had an edge of institutional dread on it that no translation could sand off. The adjunct did not run the ward. The adjunct decided what the ward was for. They took her to a different chamber, larger, colder, with a proper surgical rig instead of the calibration cradle, and they secured her arms and legs this time properly, and Kelu apologized for it in the flat voice while she did it, and Sana told her not to. They did not start with the nerve. They started at the adjunct's direction with the organ, because there was an order to what they meant to do, and the order climbed. Sana understood the shape of it the way she understood most of what they did now, by watching them prepare and reading their fluid. Muscle they had done. Bone they had done. Both were structural, both were the kind of thing even a fragile body could, given a decade and a miracle, sometimes coax back. But an organ was different. An organ was function. A wedge of the deep tissue that cleaned her blood, cut out and lifted away. That was a wound no sire survived and no sire of medicine had ever undone, because you could not knit a function back together the way you knit a bone. You could only, at best, keep the patient alive without it and hope the loss was survivable. They meant to take a piece of her that mattered, a piece a body was supposed to spend its whole life protecting, and see whether the thing in her could grow back not just structure but purpose. They opened her along the flank deep, past the muscle they had made her regrow twice into the cavity, and with a tool she did not watch they excised a wedge of the deep organ and lifted it clear and set it, still faintly working, in a shallow tray on the instrument bank where the whole ward could see it lying there apart from her. It was, Sana thought through the enormous flat pain of it, a strange thing to see a piece of yourself on a tray. It did not feel like loss. It felt like an oversight she was about to correct. "Dose," Ashin said, and his voice had the flatness of a man who has stopped hoping the result will spare him. They dosed her, and the deep masonry started, and this time Sana could not feel the individual work of it the way she had felt bone and nerve, because it was too deep and too fine, and there were too many kinds of tissue in it at once, vessels and ducts, and the dense working cells that did the actual cleaning, all of it having to be laid down in the right arrangement or the regrowth was just a lump of meat filling a hole. That was the sire of horror of uncontrolled healing in one image. Tissue that grew back as bulk instead of function. A body that filled its own wound with useless mass and called it healing and died of it anyway. She watched the physicians watch her cavity, waiting to see which it would be, and she kept her count, and at 4 minutes Vess made a sound at the instrument bank that stopped the room. "It is not filling the excision," Vess said. "It is rebuilding the architecture, vessels first, then the ductwork, then the functional tissue laid onto the scaffold in the correct arrangement. It is not growing mass restorer, it is growing the organ, it knows the pattern." "It cannot know the pattern," Alan said. "The pattern is not in the wound. The pattern is in the whole body's design, in the inheritance, in 1,000 signals that a wound site does not have access to." "It has access to it now," Vess said. "Somehow it has access to it now. Look." They looked, and Sana lay on the rig with her flank open and rebuilding and looked too, at the small display angled where she could see it, and watched a piece of herself she had never once thought about grow back into her cleaner, and better arranged than the piece lying discarded and going still in the tray on the bank. 6 minutes. 7. The vessels found their anchors. The working cells took their places on the scaffold the body had laid for them. And then, the part that made Alan step back from the rig for the second time in 2 days, the new tissue began to work. She felt the deep, dull ache of it come online, felt the organ take up its function as if it had never been interrupted, the body not merely replacing the wedge but folding the new growth seamlessly into the whole, so that within the same breath there was no wound, no loss, no missing function, only a body that cleaned its own blood exactly as it had that morning. With a fresh piece it had grown from a pattern, the sire insisted a wound could not possibly hold. It replaced the organ, Ashen said. His fluid had gone the flat gray of the truly frightened. In 8 minutes. We have spent 900 years unable to give a patient back a function once it was lost, and this body regrew a working organ in 8 minutes, from a pattern we cannot explain its access to, and folded it in without a seam. He turned to the tray where the excised wedge lay going cold and useless, the piece they had taken, the loss that was supposed to be permanent, now merely garbage. It did not need the piece we removed. It never needed it. We took a part of her, and she simply grew a better one and left ours on the table. Sana turned her head and looked at the discarded wedge in its tray, and then at the exhausted old physician, and she said the thing plainly, because someone in the room ought to. "You keep taking pieces of me to find out where I stop," she said. "And every piece you take I come back a little more finished than I was. You're not measuring a limit, restorer. You're building me. Every cut is a blueprint. Everything you break teaches the part of me that fixes it exactly how that part of me is supposed to work, better than it ever worked before you touched it. You've spent 3 days handing my body the schematics to itself, one wound at a time, and calling it an experiment." She let her head fall back on the rig. "I'd stop if I were you. But you won't. You can't. I've watched you not be able to leave a single result alone since the first morning. So go on. Find the next thing that isn't supposed to come back. I'm curious about it too now. That's what you did that you'll never take back. You made me curious about my own body, and there's no bottom to that either." The conquered adjunct from the back spoke for the first time since they had begun. "Continue," it said. "The organ proves structure and function. It does not prove whether there is any tissue in the human body the compound cannot rebuild. Test the one thing that does not come back. Test the nerve." And then, with the adjunct watching from the back with its unreadable stillness, they opened Sana's leg along the outside of the thigh, and with a tool she did not watch, they severed a nerve. The pain was a different country. Muscle and bone had hurt in ways she could hold. The nerve going was a white erasing thing that took the whole leg and turned it into a scream with no sound, and Sana's back came up off the rig against the straps, and her jaw locked, and a sound did come out of her then, low and through her teeth, and she was not ashamed of it because there was no version of a person who did not make that sound. Then the leg below the cut went silent. Dead. Gone. She could see it lying there on the rig, and it was not hers anymore. The line to it had been cut, and the world below the cut had switched off. "Dose," said Ashen. His voice had aged a year and a day. "Full dose and begin the count." They dosed her. And the ward waited, because a nerve was the thing that could not be rushed, the thing that in a sire's body did not regrow at all, not in a year, not in 10. The injury that fragile glass people simply learned to live around because there was no putting it back. A severed nerve was, in 900 years of the greatest medicine in the dark, the wound that meant a thing was lost for good. That was why they had chosen it. If the healing could not do this, then it had a limit, and a thing with a limit could, eventually, be understood and cornered and controlled. They needed her to have a limit. Sana understood that the whole room was praying, in whatever the sire did instead of praying, that the leg would stay dead. It took 11 minutes. She felt it come back the way you feel dawn through a wall. First nothing, the dead country, the switched-off leg. Then a pressure at the cut, the deep masonry starting, careful, patient, feeling out the 2 severed ends of a thing far finer and far harder to lay down than muscle or bone. Then, and this was the part that made Alan turn away, made him actually turn his body from the rig and face the wall with his 4 hands pressed to it. The sensation began to come back down the leg, region by region, like lamps being lit down a long corridor. The thigh, the knee, the shin, the ankle. The foot last, the toes. A spreading pins-and fire wave of a limb waking up that was almost worse than the losing had been. And then it was done, and the leg was hers again, and she moved the foot and it answered. The nerve was not repaired. Sana understood the difference and made them understand it later when she could speak in whole sentences again. A repaired nerve was a mended line, weaker at the mend, prone to failing where it had failed before. This was not mended. Her body had not found the two severed ends and spliced them. It had grown a new nerve, cleaner and better rooted than the one they'd cut. And where the old one had run, it laid the new one down alongside and let the old dead length simply be, an obsolete cable in a wall, while the new work carried the signal better than the original ever had. It didn't fix it, Sana said when she could. Her voice was rough. It replaced it. It looked at what you broke and it built a better one. The conquered adjunct spoke for the first time. Its collar voice was quiet and even and had no fear in it at all, which was, Sana thought, the most frightening thing she had heard in the ward, because everyone else's fear at least meant they were paying attention. Restore Prime, the adjunct said. You will stop teaching it. Adjunct. You will stop teaching it. Every procedure you have run since the anomaly has made it more capable and less governable, and you have justified each one as necessary to understand the danger, and I am telling you that you now understand the danger, and understanding it further will only make it worse. The adjunct unfolded 2 of its 4 hands. The compound is in her. It cannot be recovered. You have confirmed the tissue contains and neutralizes every recovery agent we possess. The healing cannot be halted. You have confirmed it treats every halting measure as instruction. There is one variable left that we still control. The unreadable stillness turned toward Sana on the rig, and she felt the full weight of what a fragile people did when they finally decided to stop being polite. We control whether she leaves this station. The ward went very quiet. She has a contract, Kelu said. She has a contract with a medical order that no longer exists as it did when she signed it, the adjunct said, because a medical order is a body of knowledge and a body of practice, and both have just changed. The contract provided for calibration. This is no longer calibration. It refolded its hands. Return her to containment. Convene the ward heads. And bring me the other 3 human subjects. If the variable is depth of injury, I want to know what is already growing in them before we decide what this station is willing to release. They took her back to the bright locked cell, and this time there were 2 guards on the door instead of 1, and neither of them was Sirv. Sana clocked that the moment they brought her down the corridor. The new guards were bigger, heavier built, a species she hadn't seen aboard the station, slab-shouldered, hide like cured leather. A contract security caste the conquered must have kept for the rare occasions when fragile glass physicians needed something between themselves and a problem. They wore restraint gear on their belts and carried short black wands she recognized by function if not by make. Shock goads, the kind you used on livestock and prisoners, current enough to drop a large animal. They put her in the cell and locked it and stood outside it, and the message was not subtle, and it was not meant to be. Sana sat on the bed and kept her count and waited, because waiting was a thing she was good at, and because she had understood something in the surgical chamber that the conquered adjunct, for all its stillness, had not. The adjunct thought there was one variable left that they controlled, whether she leaves this station. The adjunct was wrong, and Sana knew exactly how wrong, and she was in no hurry to correct it. Let them convene their ward heads. Let them pull the others and count what was growing. She would sit in the bright cell with her slow, strong heart and her library of solved problems, and she would let the greatest medical minds in the reachable dark work their careful way toward the things she already knew. Lying there, listening to the coolant tick in the walls and the leather breathing of the 2 guards who thought their goads meant something. A shock goad delivered current. Current was a load. She had spent 3 days learning with her whole body what her body did with a load. She hoped without heat that it would not come to that. She was not a person who wanted it to come to that. But she had stopped sometime in the surgical chamber, being a person that things happened to, and she did not fully understand yet how the room would come to know it, only that it would, and that when it did, no one in it would be angry. Least of all her. Kelu came in the middle of the sleep cycle, alone, and the fact that she came alone told Sana most of what she needed to know before the young alien said a word. The door unsealed with the guard standing aside for her, and Kelu slipped in with 2 of her 4 hands carrying a med case she plainly had no clinical reason to bring, and she set it down and stood in the dim single-panel light with her fluid moving in a way Sana had not seen from her before, fast and shallow and high in the throat. Distress. Not the professional distress of a physician whose experiment had slipped its leash, something more personal. They pulled the others, Kelu said. Boyd, Priya, and the child Tam, they imaged them. Sana sat up and Boyd is durable, as the file says. Priya, durable. Their healing is excellent, and it is governed, and it responds to the stillance exactly as the model predicts, because they were never injured past the point where the healing had to strain. Kelu's free hands found the edge of the cot, the way they found the rail. They are fine. They are exactly what we thought all 4 of you were, a week ago. That's 3, Sana said. You said all 3. The child lied about his age to sign the contract, Kelu said. You know this. Everyone knew this. And because he was young and because the Restorer Prime is careful, the child was assigned the gentlest schedule, the shallowest cuts, the lowest doses. He was our safest subject. The fluid climbed higher. And 2 days ago, when the anomaly began in you and the Restorer stopped sleeping, the child fell in the exercise yard and opened his forearm on a rail stanchion. A real injury, an accident, not marked, not scheduled, not controlled, deep. It bled. And by the time the attendants reached him, it had closed, and he had said nothing, because he was frightened they would send him away, and he needed the credit, and he is 15 years old. The dim room was very quiet. It's in him, Sana said. It is in all of you, Kelu said. The compound is in every subject who was ever dosed. But it sleeps in a body that is never hurt badly enough to wake it. In Boyd and Priya it sleeps because we were gentle. In you it woke because we were thorough. She looked at Sana with all 4 eyes, which the sire did only when they meant a thing entirely. In the child it woke because he fell, and the adjunct has convened the ward heads, and the question before them tonight is not what to do about the human whose body learns. The adjunct believes you can be contained, and released or not released as they choose. The question before them is what to do about the fact that the ability is not yours. It is the compound's. It is in 43 human beings that we know of, dosed and released and scattered across a dozen stations. Most of them never hurt badly enough to know what is sleeping in them, and any one of them on any day could fall on a rail stanchion. Sana was quiet for a moment. Outside the wall the coolant ticked. 2 guards breathed their slow leather breath. That's why you came alone, she said. I came alone because I helped make this, Kelu said, and because you designed a cleaner experiment than I did on the table with your arm open, when you had every reason to lie there and let us drown. And because the adjunct is going to propose something in that room tonight that I do not think I can stop, and I wanted one person in the reachable dark to have heard the truth from me before it happens. The med case sat unopened at her feet. She had never meant to use it. It was a reason to be let through the door. The adjunct is going to propose that the station cannot release a variable it cannot control. Not you and not the child and not the other 2, because if the ability sleeps in them it can wake. The adjunct is careful. The adjunct is not cruel. But the adjunct's arithmetic ends in one place, and I have run it myself, and it ends there every time. Say it, Sana said. They are going to decide whether 4 human beings leave this station alive, Kelu said, or whether the safest thing the conquered can do, for the fragile people it exists to protect, is to make certain the thing it created never leaves this ward at all. Sana looked at the young alien for a long moment. Then she lay back down on the cot and folded her two sound arms across her chest and closed her eyes, and Kelu made a small sound of pure human-style frustration that the collar rendered as a click. "You are not afraid," Kelu said. "No. They are discussing whether to kill you, whether to kill a child, and you lie down." "I lie down," Sana said without opening her eyes, "because you came to warn me, which means I've got a little time, and because being afraid won't spend it well. Go back before they miss you, take your case." She opened one eye, "And Kelu, when the adjunct's arithmetic gets to the end and they come to do the safe thing, don't be in the room." "Why?" "Because I like you," Sana said, "and I would rather you weren't." They came for the four of them at the end of the sleep cycle, and they did it the careful conquered way, which was almost gentle, and that was the part Sana would remember longest. There was no violence in it, not at the start. The dark-wrapped adjunct came down the corridor with the ward heads behind it and the leather-hided security cast on the flanks, and they gathered the four human subjects into the large, cold surgical chamber the way you would gather patients for a procedure, because to the sire that was what it was. They had decided. Sana read it in the settled deep stillness of the adjunct's fluid, the calm of an institution that has finished being afraid because it has chosen an action. The choice was not cruelty. Sana believed that, watching them arrange it. She believed it the way you believe a cold fact. It was mercy by their lights, a fast, clean, painless ending for four robust bodies and one dangerous sleeping thing, delivered by the most skilled hands in the reachable dark, so that a compound born to save fragile children would never grow into the thing that unmade them. They would grieve it. They would file it. They believed it was the smallest possible harm. Boyd stood against the far wall, big and quiet and not understanding, because no one had told him, and Priya had her back very straight and understood everything. And the boy Tam was crying without sound in the way of a kid who has learned that noise gets you noticed. And Sana stood between them and the adjunct, and did the thing she had been doing for 3 days, which was to keep her count and read the room and wait for the exact right moment, because she was only going to get one. And she did not intend to waste it being early. "Restoraprime Ashen will administer," the adjunct said. "He is the most skilled. It will be without pain. Begin with the accidental one, the child. He is the smallest risk and the clearest kindness." And Ashen, old, exhausted, his fluid a ragged bright, the physician who had spent 900 years of his people's craft learning to put bodies back together, took the case with the fast agent in it, and looked at the crying boy and did not move. "Restoraprime," the adjunct said. "I have spent my life," Ashen said, "learning to keep the fragile alive. You are asking me to use that hand the other way. I am asking you to protect 10 billion fragile lives from a thing 4 of us made by accident," the adjunct said. "The hand is the same hand. The oath is the same oath. It is only larger arithmetic. Administer, restorer, or I will have the cast do it, and they will not be gentle, because gentleness is not what they are for." That was the moment. Sana had been waiting for it, and she knew it when it came, not because of the adjunct's words, but because of the way the 2 leather-hided guards nearest the boy shifted their weight and brought the black wands off their belts, the small, honest motion of large creatures preparing to do a thing to a smaller one. She had spent the night listening to those guards breathe. She had spent 3 days learning, in her own body, exactly what her body did with a load. She stepped between the guard and the boy. "You don't want to do that," she said, not loud. She was never loud. Not to him, not to any of us. "I'm going to explain why, and I'm going to do it once, and I'd like you all to actually listen, because the last 3 days should have taught you that when I tell you how something is going to go, it goes that way." The nearest guard put the shock goad against her ribs and triggered it. Sana felt the current go in. It was a load, and it was a large one, enough to drop the thing the guards were built to drop, enough to lock a human heart and stop it. It hit her, and it hurt, a hard white clenching of every muscle in her side, and she let it hit her, and she stood. She stood because her body had spent 3 days learning what to do with an insult delivered through the tissue, and a shock was only another insult. And her body had, at some point in the last 72 hours, in the sealed pockets and the reinforced muscle and the slow, strong heart, worked out the general shape of the problem called damage, and stopped solving each new instance from scratch. The current fired into her, and the muscle it should have locked simply did not lock, because the muscle had already met worse and filed it, and the heart it should have stopped did not stop, because the heart had spent 3 days getting harder to stop, and the pain of it, which was real, went into her and was noted and was sorted and was set down in the library with everything else. And Sana Okonkwo stood in the cold chamber with a shock goad buried in her ribs and looked at the guard holding it, and did not so much as change her expression. The guard triggered it again, held it. The wand's light stuttered against her side. "You feel that?" Sana said. Her voice was level. "I do. It hurts. I want you to understand I'm not pretending it doesn't." She reached down, unhurried, and closed her hand around the wand where it met her ribs, and the guard tried to pull it back and could not, because the grip in that hand had more in it now than any hand the guard had ever met, and the leather-hided creature that could break a sire's spine by leaning on it put its whole slab-shouldered weight into taking its own weapon back, and the weapon did not move. "It hurts, and I'm standing here, and your arm is stronger than mine ever was, and you still can't have this back. Sit with those 2 facts for a second. Both of them are true." She took the goad out of his hand. She did not wrench it or snap it or do anything a person could later describe as violence. She simply opened his grip with her fingers the way you'd open a child's fist around something it shouldn't have, and she held the wand up in the bright planet light for the whole room to see. And then she pressed the discharge stud herself against her own bare forearm and held it there, and let the current pour into her while 40 eyes watched, and nothing happened, nothing at all. The greatest weapon in the room emptying itself into a 22-year-old cargo tech who kept her count and did not blink. "3 days ago this would have killed me," she said. "You've been very thorough. Thank you for that." Then she dropped the goad on the floor, where it clattered and rolled, and in the ringing silence after it, she turned to the conquered adjunct, and finally said the thing she had come to that station 6 weeks ago, never expecting to have to say to anyone. "You've been running the wrong experiment," Sana said. "All of you. From the first morning. You've spent 3 days trying to find the thing that stops me, and you keep escalating because you keep failing, and every time you fail you get more afraid, and the fear is making you stupid. And I'm going to tell you the truth now because the boy is crying and I want this over." She looked at the exhausted old physician still holding the case he could not bring himself to use. "You never needed to find the thing that stops me. There isn't one. You built a compound that takes the leash off a body that already knew how to rebuild, and you gave it to the one species in the dark that spent 4 billion years learning to out-adapt everything that ever tried to kill it, and now you're standing in a room full of your best tools watching every single one of them become a thing my body has already beaten. You can't stop it. There is no dose, no field, no wand, no wall. You made a thing that learns, and you gave it to a people who are nothing but learning, all the way down, and it is done, it happened. It is in 43 of us, and it is never coming back out." She let that sit. "But here's the part you got wrong, the part the adjunct's arithmetic missed, the reason you're about to kill 4 people over a mistake in your own reasoning." She held up her healed arm, turned it in the light. "You keep saying it can't be governed. You keep saying you lost the off switch. You've been so busy being afraid of a body that won't stop that not one of you has asked the only question that matters." She lowered the arm. "You never gave this body an off switch. You built the governor into the compound and you kept the stillance in your own hands, and then you handed the whole thing to a body that learns everything you do to it. So ask yourselves. Ask the one question you've been too scared to ask for 3 days." The ward was silent. Outside the dome the bright planet turned. If my body learned your poison, Sana said, and it learned your field, and it learned your wand, what makes you think the one thing it didn't learn was how to stop? No one answered her, because there was no answer, and because the Sire, whatever else they were not fools. And she watched the question land in each of them in turn, watched the fluid move, watched the great slow machine of the greatest medical minds in the reachable dark turn over the thing she had just handed them and arrive, one by one, at the place she had arrived 2 nights ago on a cot in a locked bright room. They had taught her body every one of their controls, and a body that learns a control does not only learn to defeat it, it learns the control, it learns what stop is made of. Her body had watched the stillness try to halt a healing, and it had studied the mechanism the way it studied everything, and then it had built its own, better, the way it had built a better nerve, the way it built a better everything now, because that was the only thing it knew how to do. She had not been fighting to keep healing for 3 days. Any human body could heal. She had been learning to govern it, from the inside in real time, the leash passing out of the conquered's careful hands, and into the one place they had never thought to look, which was the body itself. The patient, the specimen, the robust and forgiving and cheap-to-feed animal on the table who had been quietly taking their whole science apart and keeping the useful pieces. "Show us," the conquered adjunct said. It was the first thing the adjunct had said that was not arithmetic, and Sana respected it for that, and so she did. She had them bring a blade, a real one, a sire of surgical instrument, monomolecular, the kind that parted tissue without resistance, and she took it in her own hand, and while the ward heads and the security cast and the crying boy and the exhausted restorer prime all watched, she drew it across the back of her own forearm, a real cut, deep, and set the blade down. And she stopped it. She would never be able to explain to them how, because it was not a how, it was not a lever she pulled or a word she said. It was the same wordless thing as clenching a fist or holding a breath, a thing the body did once it knew it could. The wound opened. The blood came. The healing rose to meet it, the deep, careful masonry starting up, the tissue reaching for the tissue, and she held it. She let the cut stay a cut. She let it bleed and hurt, and stay open in the planet light for the whole room to count, 10 seconds, 20. A wound behaving like an ordinary human wound because she had told it to, because the governor was hers now, because she had learned it the same way she'd learned everything else they'd done to her. Then she let it go, and it closed clean and left no scar. "You built a compound that could rebuild anything," Sana said, into the absolute silence, "and you spent 900 years afraid it would rebuild past the point of use, so you kept the one hand that could say stop, and you never let go of it, not once, because you didn't trust a body to hold its own leash." She turned her healed arm over, the new cut already gone. "You were right not to trust yours. Yours are glass. Yours pile tissue on tissue until the healing kills you. I read your own history in the way you all flinched every time I grew something. But you never once asked whether the thing that scared you in your bodies would scare you in mine. It doesn't. My body learned to rebuild anything you threw at it, and then it learned the last thing, the thing you were too afraid to teach, the thing you kept locked in a case in your own hands for 900 years. She looked at Ashen. It learned when to stop. The adjunct did not release them. Sana had not expected it to, and she watched the ward heads wait for their institution to exhale, and saw the moment they realized it would not, because the adjunct's stillness did not break the way an ordinary creature's fear breaks when it is shown a way out. It only deepened, and she understood then that she had made an error, not a fatal one, but a real one, in thinking that a demonstration of control would reassure a people whose entire civilization was built on the terror of losing it. "You have proven the opposite of what you intended," the adjunct said. Its collar voice was as even as ever. "You believe you have shown us that the ability is safe because you hold its leash. You have shown us that the leash exists and that we cannot hold it, that it now rests in a place we cannot reach, inside a body we cannot open, in a species we do not understand, subject to a will that is not ours. A thing that stops when it chooses to stop is not governed. It is merely restrained by its own good manners. The adjunct turned its unreadable face across the four humans. We have spent 900 years, subject, learning that good manners are not a mechanism. The kindest patient in the ward is still one seizure away from killing the physician who leans over him. We do not build our medicine on the goodwill of the thing on the table. We build it on control, and you have removed control from us permanently and offered us goodwill in its place and asked us to be grateful. A pause. We are not built to be grateful for that. It is the exact shape of the thing we fear. So what? Sana said. You kill 4 people to feel in charge of a compound that's already loose in 43. We contain what we can reach, the adjunct said, and we reach you. Seal the ward. The chamber doors came down. Sana heard them go all along the 9th ward. The heavy segmented plates the Conquered used to isolate a contamination, dropping in sequence, sealing the 4 humans and the ward heads, and the security cast into the cold surgical chamber with the bright planet turning beyond the dome. The adjunct itself, she noticed, had already stepped back toward a smaller hatch at the rear, the way a careful person stays near the door. You are not built to survive what this ward can do to a sealed space, the adjunct said. Neither is the compound if it is not given a body to defend. We will evacuate the physicians. We will void the atmosphere and flood the ward with the same agent we use to sterilize a contaminated culture bank. At a concentration, no tissue survives, and we will hold it until nothing in this chamber is alive to learn anything further. Your body adapts to insult over time. It will not be given time. This is not a procedure you can study your way through, subject. It is simply the end of the room. Kelu isn't here, Sana said. It was not a plea. It was a note filed. She had told the young alien not to be in the room, and the young alien had listened, and Sana was glad of it in the flat way she was glad of most things now. No, the adjunct agreed. She requested reassignment an hour ago, and I granted it. She is the only one of us who believed you would win, and I did not want a believer in the room. Evacuate. The ward heads went, the physicians filing out through the rear hatch past the adjunct, and the security cast went with them, all but the 2 leather-hided guards who stood by the humans until the last moment out of some instinct Sana didn't bother to name, and then went too. Boyd had understood by now and stood against the wall with his big hands open and useless. Priya had taken the boy's hand and was speaking to him low and steady, telling him the true thing, which was that Sana had not been wrong yet. And Ashen, old Ashen, the Restorer Prime, the most skilled hand in the reachable dark, stopped at the rear hatch and did not go through it. Restorer, the adjunct said. I made this, Ashen said. In my ward, with my hands. I called them robust and I cut them shallow, and I told myself I understood the animal, and I was wrong in every particular, and I will not stand in the corridor and watch a hatch while my error is sterilized out of the record. He crossed back to the humans, slow, fragile, his glass body bright with a fear he had decided to walk toward instead of away from. If the room ends, I will be in it. It is the only honest place left for me to stand. The adjunct regarded him for a long moment. Then it stepped through the hatch, and the hatch sealed, and somewhere in the walls the great pumps began to turn, and the air in the cold chamber started, very quietly, to thin. Sana looked at the old physician who had chosen to stay, and at the 2 other subjects, and at the boy, and she did the arithmetic the adjunct had done, and came out somewhere the adjunct had not, because the adjunct had made the same mistake every one of them had made from the first morning. It had reasoned about the human body as a thing that adapts over time, and had concluded that if you gave it no time, you won. But adaptation was only half of what the animal was. The other half was the part the sire had never needed and so had never learned to fear, the part that did not wait to be given time, the part that had carried her ancestors through droughts and winters and the black cold between the stars, the part that endured. Her body did not only learn, it held. It had spent 3 days learning insult after insult, and every lesson it kept made it not just smarter but tougher, denser, harder to end. A thing built by 4 billion years of a world that had thinned the air and dropped the temperature and poisoned the water over and over, and been answered every single time by something that simply refused to die on schedule. "Everyone breathe slow," Sana said. "Small breaths, don't fight it. I need you calm and I need you alive, and those are the same thing right now." She moved to the boy and crouched and put her healed hand on the back of his neck, steady, the way you'd steady a frightened animal. "Tam, look at me. You fell in the yard 2 days ago and you didn't tell anyone. That was smart. You've got the same thing I've got, sleeping, and it's about to wake up, and it's going to feel strange, and you're going to be fine. Slow breaths. Stay next to me." The air kept thinning. The first of the agent came in with it, a faint sharp smell under the cold. And Sana Okonkwo settled the 4 of them against the inner wall, under the bright turning planet, in a room the greatest medical civilization in the dark had built specifically to end things that would not stop. And she kept her count, and she waited for her body, and the boy's body, and the deep old animal patience in all of them, to do the thing it had done in the tide pools and the winters and the killing dark 100,000 times before, which was not to win, and not to fight, but simply to be harder to finish than the room had planned for. It took the ward 11 hours to run out of ways to kill them, and Sana counted every one. She would tell it plainly afterward when they asked, because there was no drama in it that she cared to add, and the truth was cold enough on its own. The air went, and their bodies learned to do more with less of it, the slow, strong hearts slowing further, the tissue drinking down its own reserves, the boy panicking once and then steadying under her hand as his sleeping compound woke and took the terror out of his eyes by taking the shortage out of his blood. The agent came, the sterilizing flood at a concentration no tissue survived, and their tissue survived it the way Sana's arm had survived the strong stillance, walling it, containing it, learning it, 4 human bodies in a sealed room, each independently arriving at the same solution, because it was the same animal solving the same problem. The adjunct raised the concentration. Their bodies met the new concentration. The adjunct dropped the temperature toward the point where cells simply freeze and shatter, and their bodies banked their heat and narrowed their blood to the core and held. And Ashen, who had stayed, who breathed the thin, poisoned, freezing air with them because his own glass body could take far less of it than theirs, and he had decided that was acceptable, watched 3 humans and a boy sit calm against a wall in conditions built to leave nothing alive, and wept, in whatever way the sire wept, which was a slow dimming and re-brightening of the fluid, like a tide going out and coming back. "I do not understand," he said at hour 7, when the cold had taken his voice down to almost nothing. "I have given my life to keeping the fragile alive, and you are not fragile. You were never fragile. You let me believe you were fragile because it cost you nothing to let me believe it, and I built my whole understanding of you on it, and it was a courtesy. Your entire species has been extending my people a courtesy." The fluid tided in him. "How long have you known you could survive us?" "We didn't come here to survive you," Sana said. Her voice was low, but it was steady. The cold had not reached into it. "We came here for the credit. We're not the thing you think we are, Ashen. We're not a threat that was hiding. We're just what's left after a world spends 4 billion years trying every way it can think of to kill something and failing. You're not looking at a predator. You're looking at the survivors of the worst thing any of us ever met, which was home." She adjusted the boy against her side. "You keep asking how long we've known. We haven't been keeping it from you. You just never hurt us badly enough to see it. And the tragedy of your whole careful science, Restorer, is that seeing it was the one thing you couldn't do without doing the exact thing that made it worse." At hour 11 the pump stopped. Sana heard them wind down through the walls, and then she heard for a long while nothing at all, and then the rear hatch unsealed, and the conquered adjunct stood in it, alone, its dark wrappings very still, and looked into the cold poison room at 4 humans and a boy sitting alive against the wall, and at the Restorer Prime dying slowly among them because his fragile body had given what theirs would not, and the adjunct's fluid, for the first time since Sana had met it, moved. "Bring the physician out," the adjunct said. Its voice had lost its evenness at last. "He is the only one of us the room could kill, and I have killed him, and I still have not touched a single one of you." Sana stood. Her legs were cold and stiff and answered anyway. She bent and gathered old Ashen up off the floor. He weighed almost nothing. A bundle of glass and cartilage and failing bright fluid. The most skilled hand in the reachable dark reduced to a thing she could carry in 2 arms. And she walked him to the hatch, unhurried, through the poison and the cold. And she set him down gently at the adjunct's feet where the warm live air of the corridor could reach him. "He stayed," she said. "Fix him. You're the best there is at that. I've read it in every flinch you people have. Fix him, and then you and I are going to have the only conversation that's left." They fixed him, and it took them the better part of a day, and Sana let them, because she had nowhere she needed to be, and because watching them work was, in its way, an education. She sat in a warmed observation room with the boy and the 2 other subjects, and a wall of clear plate between her and the surgical theater, where 6 sire physicians labored over one of their own, and she watched the most patient medicine in the reachable dark do the thing it had spent 900 years perfecting, the slow, meticulous, exquisite repair of a fragile body that could not repair itself. They warmed Ashen a degree at a time. They cleared the agent from his tissue with a dozen careful agents of their own. They coaxed his glass and cartilage back toward function with a delicacy that no human hand could have matched, and it took them hours to do what Sana's body did to itself in minutes without being asked, and she understood, watching it, why they were the way they were. This was their whole miracle. This was 900 years. To keep one fragile life from slipping away took 6 of their best working a day, and they did it, and it was beautiful, and it was so far beneath what her own careless body did between heartbeats that she felt something she had not expected to feel in the 9th ward, which was pity. They were so good at it, and it was so hard for them, and they had spent all that terror and all that genius building a thing that would let their children heal in a year instead of never, and they had handed it to her, and her body had taken their life's work and made it look like the first clumsy step of a thing it already knew by heart. "You feel sorry for them," Priya said beside her. She had not said much in the sealed room. She said it now flatly, watching the physicians work. "Yeah," Sana said, "I do. They were going to kill Tam. I know. And you feel sorry for them." "Both things are true," Sana said. "I've been trying to teach them that all week. Turns out it's a hard lesson for everyone." She watched the fluid brighten slowly in Ashen's throat behind the plate, the tide coming back in. "They're not monsters, Priya. They're the most careful people I've ever met, and careful people do terrible arithmetic when they're afraid, and we scared them worse than anything in 900 years. That doesn't make it right. It just makes it theirs to carry. And it makes leaving here without breaking anything else the only move worth making." She glanced at the boy, dozing now against Priya's shoulder, his forearm smooth where the rail stanchion had opened it. "He's 15. I'd like him to remember this as the week alien saved his life, not the week he watched me end a room full of them. Both of those are available to me right now. I'm going to pick the first one if they let me." The adjunct came for the conversation when Ashen was stable, and it came alone, and it sat across a low table from Sana in a bare warm room and folded its 4 hands and did not pretend, which she respected. "I cannot control you," the adjunct said. "I have accepted this. I accepted it truly at the 11th hour standing at the hatch. It is a difficult thing for me to accept, because control is not a preference for my people. It is the ground we stand on. A sire who cannot control a process does not survive the process, and I am now responsible for a fact I cannot control, which is that the conquered created an ability it cannot govern, placed it in 43 members of a species we do not understand, and released most of them into the reachable dark before we knew what we had done. Its fluid moved, slow, deep. I have spent the last day drafting the report I must file with the Concord's governing body. I have written it 11 times. Every version ends with a recommendation, and every recommendation is a way to try to take back a thing that cannot be taken back, and I know it, and I write it anyway because I do not know how to write a report that recommends nothing. It looked at her. You have thought about this longer than I have. You have been thinking about it, I suspect, since the second morning. Tell me what you would write. Sana had in fact been thinking about it, on the cot, and in the sealed room and in the warm observation booth, and she gave it to the adjunct cold and whole, the way she gave everything now. You write the truth, she said. You write that you made a compound that takes the leash off a body's own ability to rebuild, and that in a fragile species it would be a miracle, and in a robust one it becomes something you can't switch off, and that you found this out by hurting a human badly enough to wake it. You write that there are 43 of us walking around with it asleep in us, and that it stays asleep unless we're hurt past the point where ordinary healing gives up, and that most of us will live our whole lives and die of old age without ever knowing it was there, because most people are never hurt that badly. She held his gaze. And then you write the part your arithmetic keeps skipping. You write that the only way to wake it in any of us is to do to us exactly what you did to me. To hurt us that badly. Which means the compound is not a danger the conquered released into the dark. It is a danger the conquered can only trigger by attacking the very people it's sleeping in. Leave us alone and it sleeps forever. Come for us and you teach it to wake. You are the detonator, adjunct, not us. You have been the detonator the whole time. Every escalation you ran in that ward, you were the one arming the thing you were afraid of. The adjunct was silent for a long moment. That is the report I could not write, it said finally. Because it ends with a recommendation I do not know how to give the governing body. It ends with, do nothing, pursue nothing, take nothing back. Let 43 uncontrolled variables walk free across our stations, and protect ourselves not by containing them, but by never, ever giving them a reason to become what they can become. The fluid dimmed and rose. It is the correct recommendation. I have known it was the correct recommendation since the hatch, and it asks my people to build their safety on restraint instead of control, on the goodwill of a thing we cannot govern, which is the one thing 900 years has taught us never to do. It unfolded its hands. You are asking us to trust you. No, Sana said. I'm asking you to leave us alone, which is easier than trust and lasts longer. You don't have to trust me. You just have to want, more than anything, for me to keep being bored. She almost smiled and did not, because it wasn't a smiling matter and she wasn't built that way. That's the whole arrangement, adjunct. You spent 900 years learning to control the thing on the table. Now you get to spend the rest of your history learning the harder skill, which is to not go looking for a fight with the thing on the table. My people had to learn that about our own world a long time ago. It can be done. It's just not in your nature, and you'll have to work at it. And every generation of you will have someone clever who thinks they've found the dose or the field or the wall that finally solves us. And you'll have to teach them, the way I've been teaching you all week, that there isn't one. That the only winning move is to let us finish our lunch and go home. That should have been the end of it, and it was not, because institutions are not people, and the conquered was very large and very old, and did not turn on the word of one exhausted adjunct, however correct. Sana learned this the way she learned most things aboard Halcyon Reach, which was by paying attention, while people who thought her harmless spoke near her. There was a governing body above the adjunct, a body the collar rendered with a word freighted in institutional weight, and that body had received the adjunct's report, the 11th version, the true one, the one that recommended doing nothing, and that body had done what large, old, careful institutions do when handed a recommendation to do nothing about a thing that frightens them. It had decided to do something quietly instead. Kelu told her. Kelu, reassigned out of the ward, who found her way back to the warm observation room 3 days into the wait with her fluid running fast and high, and 2 of her 4 hands empty, in a way that meant she had come with news and not instruments. They are not going to attack you, Kelu said. The adjunct was believed, No one wants to arm the detonator, as you put it. The report is accepted. Her hands found the table edge. But the governing body cannot let it rest at doing nothing. It is not in them, as you said. So they have authorized a research directive, quiet, separate from this ward, to develop a countermeasure. Not against you, they understand now that hurting you only teaches you. Against the compound itself. A cure. A way to find the sleeping ability in a human body and remove it gently, without waking it, so that the 43 can be made safe without ever being harmed. They are calling it a restoration of the natural state. They believe it is the humane answer. Repair the mistake in the ones who carry it, quietly, with consent if they can get it and without if they cannot, and the danger simply ceases to exist, with no one hurt at all. Sana sat with that for a moment. That's actually clever, she said. That's the first clever thing they've done all week. She looked at Kelu. It won't work, but it's clever, and I understand why they'll try it, and this is the part where you tell me why you came all the way back here to warn me about a thing that won't work. Because you do not know that it won't work, Kelu said, and I do. I have seen the imaging of what is in you now, all week, every scan, and I know something the governing body does not, because the governing body reads summaries and I watched the raw feed at 3 in the morning when I could not sleep. She leaned in. The ability is not a thing sitting in your tissue that can be found and removed like a splinter. It is not a compound anymore. The compound is long gone. Your body neutralized and cleared it in the first 2 days. What is in you now is not the restorative. It is what your body learned from the restorative. It is a lesson. It is written into the way your cells already work, distributed through every tissue, indistinguishable from the ordinary machinery of a human being, because it is the ordinary machinery of a human being only awake. Her fluid climbed. You cannot cut a lesson out of a body, and when they try, when they come to the 43 with their gentle cure and begin, cell by cell, to reach in and unmake the thing your body's learned. The body will treat it as an attack, Sana said quietly, and learn the cure and root around it and get stronger. And get stronger, Kelu said. Yes, they have found a way to arm the detonator that does not look like arming the detonator. They will do it believing it is mercy. And they will do it to 43 people at once, gently, across a dozen stations, and every one of those bodies will wake, and this time there will be no ward, no seal, no adjunct at the hatch. This time it will be everywhere all at once, and it will have been taught by the very people who swore they had learned their lesson. She sat back. That is why I came. The adjunct convinced the ward. I could not convince the governing body because I am a junior attendant and they do not read the raw feed. But you, she looked at Sana with all 4 eyes. You are the one thing in the reachable dark they cannot ignore. So I came to ask the thing I have no right to ask. Come with me. Stand in front of the governing body yourself, before they authorize the cure, and make them understand what they are about to teach. Sana thought about it for exactly as long as it took to look at the boy across the room. Tam was awake now, sitting with Boyd, the two of them playing some slow game with ration tokens the big man had taught him, and the boy laughed at something. A real laugh, a kid's laugh, and Sana watched it and did the arithmetic she had been doing all week and came out where she always came out. If I go stand in front of your governing body, she said, and I fail to convince them, what happens to me? You are aboard the station that carries them, Kelu said. The governing body convenes here on Halcyon Reach. That is why the adjunct's report went to them so quickly. If you fail to convince them, you are already inside the one place in the reachable dark where they could try, with everything they have all at once, to solve you before you leave. It is the most dangerous room you could walk into. Her fluid did not hide it. I am asking you to walk into it. I know you are, Sana stood. Set it up, I'll go. Priya looked up from across the room. Sana. I'll come back, Sana said. I've come back from everything they've thrown at me this week. This is just a room with important people in it. She almost smiled again and again did not. Watch the kid. Don't let Boyd teach him to gamble. The chamber where the Concord's governing body convened was the brightest room Sana had seen aboard the station, and she understood why the moment the doors opened, because it was built directly beneath the great dome, and the blue-white planet hung in the whole ceiling of it, turning, throwing its clean daylight down across a tiered ring of sire elders whose glass bodies caught and held the light like a room full of lit lanterns. There were 40 of them, or near it. She did not count, because counting them was not the count that mattered. They sat in their tiers in their pale formal wrappings, the oldest and most senior physicians and administrators of the greatest medical civilization in the reachable dark, and their fluid moved as she was brought in, a ripple of alarm and appraisal running around the ring, and the conquered adjunct stood at the base of the tiers where a petitioner would stand, because the adjunct had insisted on standing with her. And old Ashen was there too, healed and frail and upright, because Ashen had insisted on the same. The elder at the center of the highest tier spoke, and the collar gave its words the weight of an institution 900 years deep. "This is the human subject," the elder said, "the anomaly. You have brought the anomaly into the governing chamber." "I have brought a witness," the adjunct said, "to a decision this body is about to make without her testimony, which would be an error, and I have made enough errors this cycle to recognize the shape of one before it is made." "The decision is made," the elder said. "The countermeasure is authorized. We move to develop a gentle excision of the compound from the affected human population, with consent where practical, without where necessary, to restore the natural state and remove the danger without harm. It is the humane path. It is the only path that ends the exposure without requiring us to become the thing this body will not become. We have read the adjunct's report. We accept its finding that direct force only strengthens the subject. This is not direct force. This is repair. It is what we do." The elder's fluid was steady, certain, the calm of a body that has reasoned its way to a comfortable place. There is nothing the subject can say that changes the medicine. "There's one thing," Sana said. The ripple went around the ring again. A human voice, flat and level and unafraid in the governing chamber. "It was not done. She did it anyway." "You've decided the humane thing is to fix us," she said. "To find what your compound taught our bodies and gently take it back, so we go back to being the fragile, durable animals you thought we were, and the danger goes away and nobody gets hurt. I understand why that feels like mercy. I want to tell you why it isn't, and I want to do it in language a room full of physicians will understand, and then I'm going to leave, because I've got a 15-year-old waiting on me and I don't want him learning to gamble." She looked up at the tiered ring of lit lantern elders under the turning planet. "You cannot excise a lesson. That's the whole of it. That's the only sentence in this that matters. The compound is already gone. Our bodies cleared it in 2 days. What's left isn't a drug in our tissue that you can find and remove. What's left is the way our cells learn to work. It's distributed. It's everywhere in us. It is indistinguishable from an ordinary human being because it is an ordinary human being running at full capability instead of throttled down. There is nothing to cut out. There is only us awake." "Then the excision will be delicate," the elder said. "We are delicate. It is our art." "Here's what your delicate excision looks like from inside the body," Sana said. "It looks like an attack. It looks like something reaching into the machinery, cell by cell, and trying to unmake the thing the body learned to survive. And you already know it's in the adjunct's report, the one you accepted. You already know exactly what a human body does with something that reaches in and tries to unmake it. It learns it. It roots around it. It gets stronger. You have found a way to do to 43 people, gently, across a dozen stations, all at once, the exact thing that woke the ability in me. You have found a way to arm the detonator while calling it a cure, and you will do it believing you are being humane, and every single one of those bodies will wake, and this time it will not be one human in one sealed ward with an adjunct standing at the hatch. It will be everywhere, all at once, taught by you, because you could not, as a people, do the one thing your own report told you to do, which was nothing." The chamber was silent. The planet turned in the dome above them, spilling its bright ordinary daylight down across 40 lit elders and one small dirt-flecked human in a subject's plain wrap. And Sana let the silence run, because she had learned a long time ago that the silence did more work than she could. "You are asking us," the central elder said at last, and its voice had changed, the certainty gone thin, "to do nothing. Again. You are asking the governing body of the concord of restorative medicine to look at a danger loose among a species we do not understand and to choose, deliberately, to develop nothing, deploy nothing, attempt nothing. To protect 10 billion fragile lives by trusting the goodwill of 43 creatures we cannot control." The fluid moved through the whole ring like wind through grain. "You do not understand what you are asking. Restraint is not safety to us. Restraint is the absence of safety. It is the void we have spent our entire history filling with control." "I understand exactly what I'm asking," Sana said. "I'm asking you to grow up." She said it without heat, the way she said everything, and it landed harder for that. And no one in the ring answered it, because there was no answer that a room full of the most careful people in the dark could give to a 22-year-old who had survived everything they had and was not even slightly angry about it. "My whole species had to learn it," she said. "We had to learn to live on a world that would kill us the second we got careless, and we couldn't control the world. We were never going to control the world. The world was 4 billion years bigger than us, and it did not care. So we learned the other thing. We learned restraint. We learned when not to go into the water, and when not to eat the bright berry, and when not to pick the fight we could technically start. We built a whole species out of knowing which dangers to leave alone. That's the skill you never had to learn because your danger was always inside you, always your own fragile body, always something you could get your hands around and control. Well, now there's a danger you can't get your hands around. Now there's a thing in the dark that's bigger than your control and doesn't care about it and will only ever hurt you if you make it. Welcome to having a world you have to share." She turned to go. "We've had one for 4 billion years. It can be done. You just have to want us bored more than you want us solved. And I promise this whole bright room, bored is very much what we'd prefer." She had turned to go, and she was 3 steps toward the doors, when one of the elders on the lower tier did the thing she had, on some level, been waiting for. Sana felt the dart go into the back of her shoulder before she heard the small pneumatic cough of the injector. It was well done. It was fast and quiet, and it came from a physician who had palmed the device before she ever entered the room, and it delivered its full load into her muscle in the half-second before the rest of the chamber understood what had happened. She stopped walking. She did not turn around right away. She stood with the dart in her shoulder and read what was going into her, the way she read everything now, and she understood it before the elder who had fired it found the nerve to speak. "Elder Sethune," the central voice said, sharp, "you have not been authorized." "I have authorized myself," said the one who had fired, rising from the lower tier, its fluid running hot and fast and certain. "The prototype is viable. The excision agent is developed enough to attempt. We have the subject before us, isolated, singular, aboard our own station, surrounded by our own people. This body debates whether to trust the goodwill of 43 uncontrollable creatures, and I say we do not have to, because one of them walked into this chamber and I have just given it the cure." The elder Sethune turned its 4 eyes on Sana's back. "It will not wake a population. It is 1 dose in 1 subject. If it works, if the compound's lesson can be excised, then we do not need restraint, we do not need trust, we do not need to grow up, as the creature so insultingly instructs. We need only to finish developing what is already in its shoulder, and we will know within the hour whether the humane path is open to us after all. I have taken the risk this body was too timid to take." Sana turned around slowly, the dart still in her shoulder. "You want to know whether it works," she said. "That's fair. I want to know too. Let's find out together. Nobody move, nobody's in danger. This is going to be the most useful hour this room has ever spent." She reached back and drew the dart out of her shoulder, and set it on the floor, and then she stood in the bright turning daylight under the dome and let the elder Sethun's excision agent do whatever it had been built to do, while 40 elders and 1 adjunct and 1 healed Restoraprime watched, and she narrated it to them, because she could feel it, and because they could not, and because she had decided somewhere in the last week that if these people were going to keep learning their lesson the hard way, she would at least make sure they learned it clearly. "It's in the tissue now," she said. "Your agent. It's clever, it's not attacking me, it's not trying to hurt anything, it's reaching into the machinery very gently, looking for the lesson, trying to find the parts of the way my cells work that the compound taught and switch them quietly off. That's genuinely good work. If I were still the animal you thought I was 6 weeks ago, it might even do it." She tilted her head, listening inward. "But I'm not, and here's what's actually happening, and I want the whole room to hear it. My body has met your agent. It doesn't know what it is yet, but it knows the shape of it, something reaching in, trying to unmake what's there. It's met that shape a dozen times this week. The stillance, the strong dose, the field, the cold, the poison in the sealed room. Every one of them was a thing reaching in to unmake what's there, and every one of them my body learned, and it kept the lessons, and it filed them under the same heading." She looked up at Sethun. "Your cure just walked into a body that already knows exactly what to do with things that try to reach in and unmake it. It's not being cured, Elder. It's being read. My body is taking your agent apart to see how it works, the way it took apart everything else you ever gave it, and in about," she paused, feeling it, "there. It's done. It knows your cure now, all of it. Every mechanism you spent months developing, my body just learned in the time it took me to tell you about it. And it will never, ever be fooled by it again." The chamber had gone utterly still. "You understand what you just did," Sana said, and for the first time all week there was something almost like gentleness in it, the gentleness of a person delivering news they know will land hard. "You had 1 card left. 1. The cure was the only thing in the reachable dark that could have touched what your compound made, because it was the only approach that didn't look like an attack, and a body can only learn a thing after it's seen it. As long as the cure stayed in your labs unused, it was a real card. You could have held it forever. You could have negotiated with it, threatened with it, kept it in reserve for a day you truly needed it. And Elder Sethun just spent it. On me. In a room where I could learn it and carry the lesson back out to the other 42. She let that settle across the tears. There is now no approach left in your entire science that a human body hasn't seen and beaten. Every dose, every field, every cure. You had 1 card and your bravest elder played it out of impatience, and now you have none, and the only thing standing between your 10 billion fragile people and a danger you can never again touch is the exact thing I offered you before he fired that dart. Restraint. Ours and yours. It was always going to come down to restraint. Elder Sethun just made very sure of it." Sethun did not answer. There was nothing to answer. The elder sank back into its tear with its fluid gone gray and deep. An old, proud physician who had gambled the last real leverage its civilization possessed and lost it in under a minute, in front of everyone, and would carry that for the rest of a life far longer than Sana's. It was the adjunct who broke the silence, and it did so by turning, deliberately, away from Sana, and facing the tiered ring of its own elders, and speaking to them in the flat translated voice that Sana had first heard as cold and had learned over a hard week to hear as something closer to grief. "I stood at the hatch of the 9th ward, the adjunct said, 11 hours after I ordered a sealed room to kill 4 human beings by every means that room possessed, and I watched them sit against the wall alive, having harmed no one, while the only casualty was the physician who chose to share their fate. I have spent my life believing that safety is control, and that control is the absence of danger. And I have watched this cycle, every instrument of control we possess handed to a body that treats control as a curriculum. The stillance taught it, the field taught it, the cold and the agent taught it. And now the cure, the last thing, the humane thing, the card I did not know Elder Sethun held, has taught it too, in this chamber in front of this body, because we could not stop ourselves from playing it. The fluid moved through the adjunct in a long, slow tide. We are the most careful people in the reachable dark. And we have spent this entire cycle unable to stop ourselves from arming the one danger we cannot survive, over and over, each time believing this attempt would be the one that finally let us control it. The subject is right. The danger was never the human body. The danger was our own hands. We cannot leave a thing alone. It is not in us. And the first act of restraint my people will ever have to perform is the hardest one imaginable, which is to sit in a room with a thing we cannot control and do nothing, and keep doing nothing forever, generation after generation, every time some clever, frightened elder among us believes they have finally found the dose. It turned back to Sana. You told us to grow up. I did not like it. It was correct. Growing up is precisely this. It is learning that some things in the dark are not yours to solve, and that reaching for them anyway is how the fragile die. Sana inclined her head once. It was as close as she came to approval. That's the report, she said. Right there, that's the 11th version. Write that one. The central elder was quiet for a long moment, the light of the turning planet moving across its ancient glass face. And then, slowly, in the way of an institution 900 years deep turning at last on its axis, it spoke. The countermeasure directive is rescinded, it said. The excision program is ended. Elder Sethun's action is entered into the record as the error that ended it. The fluid steadied through the whole ring, not to certainty, because certainty was gone, but to something harder and newer and more honest. The concord of restorative medicine will develop nothing further against the human population that carries the compound. We will pursue nothing. We will attempt nothing. We will protect our people by the one means left to us, which is to give these creatures no reason ever to become what they can become. The record will note that this decision was made not from wisdom but from the exhaustion of every alternative, which is, the subject informs us, how her own species learned the same lesson. A pause. It will have to be enough. It is what there is. They processed the release the way the sire did everything, which was carefully, and it took 2 days, and Sana spent most of it making sure the terms were written down. She was not naive about it. A decision made in a bright chamber under a turning planet by the exhaustion of every alternative was a real decision, but it was made by the elders who were in the room. And there would be elders who were not in the room, and there would be a next generation of elders, and some of them would be clever and frightened inexactly, the way Sethun had been clever and frightened. And Sana had lived long enough and lost enough to know that a promise was worth precisely the paper it made hard to walk away from. So she sat with the adjunct and a conquered clerk whose whole function was the drafting of binding instruments, and she made them write it down. The 43 human subjects were free. Their contracts were void. The calibration program was ended. The credit each of them had banked was paid out in full, and then doubled, which Sana had not asked for and the adjunct had insisted on, and which she recognized for what it was, which was not generosity but the down payment on a very long peace. The conquered would make no further study of the compound in human tissue. The conquered would develop no countermeasure, no excision, no cure, and this was entered not as policy but as covenant, with the clerk's most binding language, the kind the sire used for the oaths that held their whole fragile society together, because a people who could be killed by a fall had learned to take their promises with a seriousness that Sana found, in the end, almost moving. Break the covenant, the instrument said, and the conquered accepted that it had itself chosen to arm the danger and forfeited any claim to be its victim. They'll test it, Sana told the adjunct when the clerk had gone. You know that. Not soon. Maybe not for 100 years. But someday there'll be a sire who reads this whole record as a challenge instead of a warning, and decides that the elders of the 9th Ward simply lacked the right approach, and starts quietly working the problem again. Yes, the adjunct said, there will. So you'd better keep this record where they can read it, all of it, not the clean version, this one. The one where you tried everything you had, escalated every time you failed, and armed the thing you feared with your own hands, over and over, until you had nothing left. She looked at the alien across the table. The point of a warning isn't that it happened once. It's that it will happen exactly the same way every time, to anyone who tries. Make sure your clever, frightened descendant knows that before they pick up the injector. It's the only thing that'll stop them, and it won't stop all of them. And the ones it doesn't stop will teach us something new, and we'll carry that lesson out too. That's the arrangement now. Forever. You built a thing that learns, and you gave it to a people who are nothing but learning. There's no bottom to it. There's only how long you can go without reaching in. The adjunct folded its 4 hands. You speak, it said, as though you find no satisfaction in this. I don't, Sana said. There's nothing to be satisfied about. You're not my enemy, adjunct. You never were. You're a fragile, brilliant, terrified people who did a careful, cruel thing out of fear and got taught a lesson by a body that doesn't know how to lose. And now you have to live the rest of your history next to that body being very, very careful. That's not a victory. That's just Tuesday from where I'm standing. It's the same thing my whole species has been doing since the tide pools. Living next to a thing bigger than us that'll kill us if we get careless, and learning, slowly, painfully, generation by generation, not to get careless. She stood. Welcome to it. It's a hard skill. You'll be terrible at it for a long time. But you're the most careful people in the dark, so maybe you've got a shot. Ashen found her the morning of the release, in the corridor outside the shared quarters, and the old physician walked on his own now, slow, upright, his glass body sound, and he stopped in front of her and did not say anything for a while. You carried me out of the room, he said at last. I ordered you killed, and you designed a cleaner experiment for me while I did it, and then you carried me out of a room I chose to die in, and set me at the feet of the creature that had just ordered your death, and told it to fix me because I was worth fixing. The fluid tided slow in his throat. I have been trying for 2 days to find the word for what that is. We have a great many words. I told you that once when I still believed it. And I have gone through all of them and none of them fits, and I have concluded that it is a human word, and that my people do not have it, because we never needed it, because we were never strong enough to need it. Mercy's the usual word, Sana said. No, Ashen said. Mercy is what the strong grant the weak because it costs them little. This cost you. You were cold and you were tired, and every one of us in that ward had spent a week hurting you, and you carried me out anyway, not because it was easy but because it was right, and you did it without warmth and without anger and without expecting anything for it. There is a colder word than mercy for that, and a better one, and I do not have it, and I have decided that the not having is the most important thing I learned this cycle. He looked up at her. We spent 900 years learning to keep the fragile alive, and it turns out there was a whole discipline above ours that we never even knew to reach for, because we were never strong enough to be tested in it. The discipline of what you do with power over a thing that cannot stop you. You have it. Your whole terrible species has it, hammered into you by 4 billion years of being the thing at the top that could afford to be gentle and mostly chose to be. The tide went out in him and came back. I am glad I stayed in the room, subject. I would have died having learned only that I was wrong about your body. I stayed, and I learned I was wrong about your soul, and that is a better thing to have nearly died for. Sana looked at the old alien for a moment, and then she did the thing she almost never did, because it wasn't in her nature and the audience for it had left her life a long time ago, and because Ashen had earned it in a way very few people ever had. She smiled, small, real, there and gone. Take care of your children, Ashen, she said. That's what all of this was for. That's what you were reaching for the whole time, a way to make your kids heal. You'll get there, slower than you wanted, without us. But you're the best there is at the patient way, and the patient way is the one that was always going to work for people like you. She put her hand on his fragile shoulder, light, careful, the way you'd touch something you could break. Go be gentle. It's the thing you're for. Kelu was waiting at the dock. The ship was a conquered courier, plain and fast, cleared for a run to the transit hub out past the belt line, where 6 weeks ago a recruiter had walked through a crowd of stranded contract crew like a person through an orchard. Boyd was already aboard, and Priya, and the boy Tam, who had spent the morning saying goodbye to every physician who would let him and had been given, by one of them, a small sire of medical charm that he wore now on a cord around his neck, and would keep, Sana suspected, for the rest of a life that had almost ended in a sealed ward and hadn't. The other subjects would follow on later runs, scattered back out across the dark, each of them carrying the sleeping lesson, none of them ever likely to wake it, all of them free. I requested a transfer, Kelu said, off the station, off medicine for a while. The adjunct granted it. Her 4 hands were still for once. I do not know what I am after this. I helped build the thing, and I helped it walk out the door, and I do not know which of those is the person I am going to be. I thought you might. You're the one who watched the raw feed at 3 in the morning, Sana said. You're the one who came alone to warn me twice when it could have cost you everything. You're the one who believed I'd win when the adjunct kept the believers out of the room. She shouldered her small kit. You're the one who couldn't leave a thing alone either, but the thing you couldn't leave alone was the truth. That's a different disease than the rest of your people have, Kelu. Yours might even be the cure, not for us, for you. For what your people are going to have to become to live next to us. She looked at the young alien. Go be that. The one who watches the raw feed and tells the room what's actually in it, even when the room doesn't want to hear. Every careful, frightened people needs one of those, and you're already it, and you didn't even have to be taught. The fluid moved in Kelu high and fast, and then slowly settled not to calm, but to something steadier than calm, something that had decided. Will I see you again? Kelu said. Probably not, Sana said. That's sort of the whole arrangement. The safest thing for everybody is for me to be very boring, very far away for a very long time. She stepped toward the ship. But if you ever do see me again, it'll mean somebody reached in when they shouldn't have, and I came back out, and there's a new lesson to carry. So let's both hope this is goodbye. Goodbye then, Kelu said. Subject Sana. Sana stopped, 1 foot on the ramp, and looked back at the young alien who had learned her name and used it, and she gave the last of what she had, which had never been much, and had always been enough. Sana, she agreed. It was always Sana. Nobody in that ward ever once asked. The courier ran quiet, and the pilot was a sire who had plainly been told exactly what the 4 passengers were, and had plainly not slept the night before flying them. And Sana let the alien have its nerves, because there was nothing she could say through a translation collar that would make a fragile creature comfortable sharing a hull with 4 things that could not be killed. She sat in the passenger bay with the others and watched the blue-white planet fall away behind them through the small aft port, Halcyon Reach shrinking to a bright fleck against it, the greatest medical civilization in the reachable dark growing small, and then gone. They really can't fix it, Boyd said into the quiet. He had said very little all week. He was a man who said little, and what he said he had thought about. What's in us? It's just in us now, for good. For good, Sana said. It's not a thing anymore, it's just how we heal now. Faster, cleaner, no scars. And if we ever get hurt bad enough to wake it all the way up, she flexed her hand, the one with more in it than the other used to have, it learns. But you'd have to get hurt very, very badly for that, Boyd, worse than you're likely to on any ordinary day. It sleeps mostly. You'll live a long life and it'll just mean you heal well. That's all it'll ever be for most of us. A body that heals well and doesn't scar and gets old very, very slowly. How slowly, Priya said. She had caught the last part. She caught most things. I don't know, Sana said honestly. Neither do they. That's part of what scared them at the end when they were doing the math. A body that treats every injury as a lesson and rebuilds better than it was, it doesn't just heal wounds. Aging's a kind of wound. Slow, distributed, the body losing the argument with time a little more each year. She watched the planet's afterglow fade in the port. Mine stopped losing that argument about 4 days ago. I can feel it. I'm 22, and I think I'm going to be 22 for a while. I don't know how long a while. Neither do they. I don't think anybody's going to find out for a long time. The boy Tam looked up from the charm around his neck. Is that good, he said, or bad? Sana thought about it, because it was a real question and the kid deserved a real answer. Both, she said. Like most true things, it's good if we stay the people we are. If we stay bored and careful and mostly gentle, and we go home and live our long, quiet lives and don't reach in where we shouldn't. And it's bad if we forget where it came from. If we start thinking that because we're hard to kill we're better, or owed something, or allowed. That's the thing that scared the sire of worst of all right at the end, and they were right to be scared of it, and I'll tell you the truth, Tam, it's the only thing about any of this that scares me too. She looked at the boy. The compound didn't make us dangerous. We were always dangerous. All it did was take away the last excuse. We used to be able to say we were gentle because we had to be, because the galaxy could still hurt us because we were fragile too in our own way. Now some of us aren't. And gentleness that isn't forced on you anymore, that's a choice. Every day. That's the hardest kind there is. The sire are going to spend the next 1,000 years learning to be careful around us, and we're going to spend it learning to deserve it. She sat back. So, both. Good if we're worthy of it, bad if we're not, and nobody gets to decide that once. You decide it every morning for the rest of a very long life, starting now. Starting with not letting Boyd teach you to gamble. Boyd made a sound that was almost a laugh. The boy smiled, uncertain, and turned the charm over in his fingers and looked out the port at the dark, and Sana watched him do it and thought that of all the things she had carried out of the 9th Ward, the most important was sitting right there, 15 years old, deciding what to do with a life that had almost ended and hadn't, and would now go on a very long time. The transit hub had not changed in 6 weeks. That was the strange thing, the thing Sana turned over as the courier docked, and the 4 of them walked out into the same wide grubby concourse where a recruiter had once walked through them like an orchard. The same crowds. The same tired contract crews between berths, the same species mixing under the same flat commercial lights, the same smell of recycled air and cheap food and long waits. The galaxy had not noticed. Nothing out here knew that on a bright station over a blue-white world, the most careful people in the dark had spent a hard week learning that there was a thing they could not control and would have to live beside forever. The concourse just went on being a concourse. Sana found that she was glad of it. She had never wanted to be a thing the galaxy noticed. She had wanted passage somewhere with a sky and hazard credit to buy it, and she had both now, doubled, and a long, strange life to spend it in, and the anonymity of a crowd that did not know what walked through it was worth more to her than any of it. They said their goodbyes at the concourse's branching because they were scattering now, 4 people who had been through a sealed room together and would carry it separately for the rest of long lives. Boyd was heading coreward, to a berth on a hauler that didn't ask questions. Priya would not say where she was going, which was exactly like Priya, and Sana didn't ask. And the boy. I don't have anywhere, Tam said. He said it plainly, the way the kid said hard things, having learned that flinching from them didn't help. I lied about my age to get the contract because I didn't have anywhere before it either. I've got the credit now. Doubled. But I don't actually know where you go when you can go anywhere. Sana looked at him for a moment. You go somewhere with a sky, she said. That's where I'm going. There's a world about 4 days out, independent, no conquered, no company, just weather and dirt and a lot of people who mind their own business. I've got enough credit for passage and a stake, and now so do you, and it turns out I'm going to be 22 for a while and could use somebody around who remembers that I'm not actually as old as I'm about to look. She shouldered her kit. Come see a sky, kid. You spent a week almost dying under an alien dome. You've earned some weather. The boy stared at her. Then he fell in beside her, and the 2 of them walked off into the grubby anonymous crowd, and nobody in it looked twice, and that was exactly right. That should be the end of it, and mostly it is. The world 4 days out had a sky the color of nothing in particular, a working gray that went gold in the evenings and white with rain a third of the year. And Sana Okonkwo bought a stake at the edge of a valley town where the work was hard and the questions were few. And she and the boy learned to farm a crop neither of them had heard of before, badly at first and then adequately. And the years began to go by in the slow way years go by when you have decided to let them. Tam grew up. That was the thing Sana watched most closely in the quiet years, because it was the thing she had carried out of the ward and the thing she felt most responsible for. The boy becoming a man, on a world with a sky, deciding every morning what to do with a body that healed too well and aged too slow and would someday have to watch ordinary friends grow old while it did not. He decided well mostly. He had good instincts and a hard early lesson and a stubborn streak that Sana recognized, because it was the same one that had carried her kind out of the tide pools. And he chose, most mornings, to be gentle, which was the only choice that mattered and the hardest one there was, and he made it and made it and made it. Word did travel eventually. It always does. Out at the transit hubs and along the belt lines there began to be a story, the way there are always stories, about humans who couldn't be killed, about a compound and a medical order and a sealed room that failed. And the story grew in the telling the way stories do, and most of it was wrong, and Sana heard versions of it now and then from traders passing through the valley town and never once corrected any of them. Let the story be wrong. Let it be big and vague and frightening. A frightening story was its own kind of covenant. It kept the clever frightened people, wherever they were, from reaching in. It did the work of the conquered's binding instrument, out where no instrument reached, and it cost her nothing but the mild strangeness of hearing herself turned into a rumor by people who would never know they'd met her. The Sire kept their covenant. As far as Sana ever learned in all the long, quiet years, they never reached in again. Somewhere on a bright station over a blue-white world, the record of the 9th Ward sat in the Conquered's deepest keeping, the true version, the 11th. The one where the most careful people in the dark armed the thing they feared with their own hands, over and over, until they had nothing left, and now and then, she liked to imagine, some clever frightened young physician read it all the way through and understood it and set the injector down. She hoped Kelu had a hand in keeping it. She never knew. That was the arrangement. She had told the young alien to hope they never met again, and they never did, and the never meeting was the whole measure of how well it had all gone. The last thing worth telling happened years on, in the valley town, on an ordinary gold evening. A ship came down that didn't belong to the usual run, small, plain, Conquered made, though the markings had been half stripped, and a single figure came off it, and into the town's one common house asking, carefully, in a translation caller's flat voice, after a human woman who would have arrived years ago with a boy. The town minded its own business, as the town did, and no one told the alien anything, and Sana heard about it the way she heard about everything now, which was late and second-hand from Tam, who was a grown man by then, and had learned to watch the raw feed of his own quiet world the way a certain young sire had once taught her people watched theirs. She went down to the common house alone, in the gold evening, and she found the alien sitting at the far table with its 4 hands folded, and its fragile glass body catching the last of the daylight through the open door, older now, the fluid moving slow and deep under skin gone fine with age. And she knew it before it turned, because there was only one sire in the reachable dark who would ever have come looking, and she had told that one to hope this day never came. But it was not the day she had feared. She read that too before either of them spoke in the settled stillness of the old alien's fluid, which held no injector's tension, no institution's arithmetic, nothing reaching in. Kelu had not come to solve her. Kelu had come the way an old person crosses a great distance near the end of a long life, to see, once, with their own eyes, the thing that had changed everything, and to sit with it a while in the ordinary light of a world with a sky. You told me to hope we never met again, Kelu said. I did, Sana said and sat down across from her, unhurried the way she did everything. Which means somebody reached in and I came back out and there's a new lesson to carry. That was the deal. She looked at the old alien in the gold light. So, which was it? What did they try this time? Nothing, Kelu said. No one tried anything the Covenant held. It has held my whole life and it will outlast me, and I came all this way to tell you that because I did not want it to be one more rumor at a transit hub. I wanted you to hear it from someone who watched the raw feed. The fluid tided slow. They never reached in again, Sana. Your people frightened mine into wisdom, and the wisdom took, and it is holding, and I am old now, and I wanted to sit in your sky once before the end and tell you it worked. That is all. That is the whole reason I came. Sana Okonkwo sat with the old alien in the common house of a valley town under a sky going gold. A woman who would be 22 for a long time yet. Across from a creature reaching the end of a fragile life it had spent well. And outside the open door the ordinary evening went on. The working people coming in from the fields. The weather turning the color it turned. Nobody looking twice. And she thought about a sealed ward and a bright chamber, and a whole careful, terrified civilization that had learned. The hard way, the oldest lesson her kind had ever known. Good, she said. Then we did it right. She reached across the table and laid her hand, light and careful, over the old alien's folded ones, the way you touch a thing you could break and have chosen, every day of a long life, not to. You watched the raw feed, Kelu, right to the end. Turns out that was the cure after all, not for us, for you. The gold light moved on the fine old glass of the alien's face. Stay a while. Watch our sky do the thing it does. You came a long way to see what your people made, and it's just this. A woman on a porch and a boy grown up in a world nobody's afraid of. That's the whole terrifying secret. That's what you couldn't switch off. She sat back and the evening came on, slow and gold and unremarkable in hers. We just wanted to go home and be left alone. You were the only ones who ever made us prove we meant it.